December 17, 1944. The Ardennes forest lay shrouded under a frozen gray blanket, the kind of snow that made every branch bow and every road vanish beneath its deceptive thickness. A cold wind sliced through the towering evergreens, carrying with it the distant rumble of artillery and the faint scent of smoke, a hint of destruction already begun. The silence here was deceptive, a thin veneer over a world bristling with danger. A single snowflake clinging to a branch could signal nothing, or everything. Jack Miller sat behind the wheel of a 2.5-ton GMC truck, the engine coughing against the biting cold. The cab smelled of oil, worn leather, and the faint metallic tang of frost settling on metal. His fingers, numb inside thin gloves, gripped the wheel as if it could shield him from the unknown stretching ahead. Behind him, a convoy of trucks had scattered hours earlier, swallowed by the twisting narrow roads of the Ardennes. He was alone, or nearly so, though he would later insist he never felt truly alone in that forest. The map in his lap was little more than a suggestion, scribbled lines and landmarks obscured under a veil of white. Orders had been clear, precise even, but the fog, literal and figurative, had a way of rewriting clarity. Hitler's forces were surging in what intelligence called a last gamble, a desperate push through frozen terrain to split the Allies along the Western Front. For the Americans holding the line, fuel was life. Tanks needed it, trucks needed it, men needed it. Without it, the bulge of German advance could have swallowed the small towns and hamlets strewn along the way. Jack Miller, unknown to anyone beyond the convoy, held in his hands the thin thread that could tie a failing front together, or let it snap entirely. He pressed on, tires crunching in snow, the engine struggling as if aware of the stakes. The forest closed in, shadows folding over shadows, each tree a silent sentinel in the darkness. There were no signs, no markers. Only the cold, only the frozen road twisting ahead. His headlights carved narrow tunnels through drifting snow, illuminating the occasional gleam of ice or the dark silhouette of a fallen tree. Somewhere beyond that line of sight, artillery roared. Somewhere beyond the horizon, men bled and froze and fought. He didn't know it yet, but the path he would choose in the next few hours would ripple through the entire Ardennes, changing the fate of a battle that had already swallowed so much life. Jack's thoughts, if they could be called that, moved in half-formed patterns. Keep moving, don't get stuck, follow the map. But the map seemed to shift under his gaze, lines bending and twisting as if the forest itself were conspiring to hide the way. And then came the turn. A fork in the road, unmarked, obscured beneath snow. Left was the way he knew, right was a path that had no endorsement, no approval, no promise. A wrong turn, the map whispered. And yet, almost instinctively, he swerved right. The choice felt arbitrary, accidental. But as the wheels bit into the packed snow, a strange clarity came over him. The forest seemed to breathe around the truck, the wind and the snow conspiring to hush every other sound. Even the distant thump of artillery faded into a muted heartbeat. He pressed on, unaware that the road he had chosen, hidden, unpatrolled, marked by no man's approval, was the only route that could save the armored columns waiting miles ahead, their engines coughing, their treads slipping, and their crews praying for the fuel that might never come. The Ardennes is a forest of illusions. It can deceive the eye, the ear, the mind itself. Jack felt it in the sway of the truck, in the way the shadows of the trees seemed to chase him, and in the silence that pressed against the cab as if to whisper, "Turn back." He ignored it, for there was no turning back now. Orders were behind him. Safety, wherever it had been, was gone. Ahead lay only the unknown, a road that had never carried a convoy of U.S. Army fuel trucks, yet somehow felt destined to bear their burden. Frost coated every surface. The windshield was a thin barrier between him and the world outside, a fragile wall against the white expanse that could swallow men whole if they hesitated. Every bump in the road, every jolt of the truck reminded him of what was at stake. Tanks were waiting for him, miles away, the lives of hundreds, or thousands, resting on a decision made in silence, in snow, in solitude. Jack Miller didn't know it yet, but the forest, the frost, the wrong turn he had just taken were all conspiring to create a moment that would be written down later in footnotes and whispers of those who survived. The road twisted and narrowed. He passed abandoned farms, their windows dark, roofs heavy with snow, chimneys frozen mid-spire, their fires extinguished by the cold. No one waved, no one called, no one saw him. Yet the weight of unseen eyes pressed upon him. The eyes of history, of men frozen in foxholes, of tanks waiting for life-giving fuel. Each mile carried him further from what he knew and closer to a destiny he could not yet comprehend. Occasionally, a distant thud or crack would punctuate the monotony, artillery falling somewhere beyond the tree line, or perhaps a tree succumbing to the weight of ice and snow. He learned to pause mid-breath and listen. Frostbitten fingers adjusted the gears, checked the gauges, and kept the engine alive. Every sound, every vibration, every moment of quiet became a language of survival, a rhythm he learned by instinct. By nightfall, the forest had transformed into a cathedral of snow and shadow. The moon, pale and dim, scattered across the landscape like powdered silver. Jack's truck pressed onward, a lone vessel navigating a frozen sea of white. Somewhere ahead, the roar of battle marked the horizon. Somewhere ahead, men would curse the delay of supply convoys, but not this one. Not tonight. The wrong turn, accidental and invisible, would carry life where orders could not. Jack Miller did not speak. Words were unnecessary. The truck moved, and with it moved the invisible thread of history. A village lay waiting, a battalion lay waiting, a future lay waiting. The cold bit deeper, but so did his determination. In the quiet, he became part of the Ardennes itself, patient, relentless, and unyielding. Hours later, when the snow began to thin and the road emerged from the forest into open ground, the first signs of Allied positions appeared. Tank tracks half buried under snow, men trudging through the mud, their eyes wary, searching. Jack had arrived, not where he was expected, not according to orders, not according to the map, but precisely where he needed to be. And in that moment, as the first barrels of fuel were unloaded, the true weight of his journey would reveal itself. A wrong turn had become the pivot on which a battle teetered. History would remember the generals, the strategies, the maps marked with red ink and dashed lines. It would not remember Jack Miller, alone in his cab, listening to the wind and snow, trusting instinct over orders. Yet the lives saved, the tanks fueled, and the village spared owed their existence to a decision made in isolation, in fear, in silence. A decision that, by all conventional reckoning, was wrong. And yet, as the first engines roared to life and the convoy pressed onward into the cold dawn, it was clear. Some turns are only wrong until they are proven right. The turning point, Jack Miller's journey. The night pressed on, and the Ardennes seemed to stretch endlessly, a frozen maze of white and shadow. Jack Miller's headlights carved narrow slices through the snow-draped trees, illuminating nothing but the next few yards. Every mile was measured not in distance but in uncertainty. His engine rattled and coughed as if protesting the impossible mission it had been given. He pressed forward, though he had no idea where forward truly led. The wrong turn he had taken hours before felt increasingly like the right one. The snow-covered path was narrow, littered with fallen branches and hidden potholes. He navigated carefully, feeling every vibration through the steering wheel. The truck, loaded with hundreds of gallons of fuel, was heavy and unforgiving. One wrong swerve could mean disaster, not just for him but for the battalions depending on him. Each time the tires slipped on hidden ice, his heart jumped, a reminder that luck was as essential as skill in these frozen woods. Wind howled through the gaps in the cab, rattling the frame like the whispers of unseen watchers. Frostbitten fingers worked with mechanical precision, checking gauges, adjusting gears, coaxing the engine to continue. The cold was relentless, gnawing at his body, seeping into his bones. Jack ignored it, focusing on the road ahead. He had been a truck driver long enough to know that in moments like this, hesitation was the enemy. Every second wasted could cost men their lives. Every wrong move could turn this solitary mission into a catastrophe. Then came the first sign of enemy presence. A distant flare lit the sky, briefly illuminating the silhouette of German infantry patrolling the edge of the forest. Jack froze, the truck idling as he considered his options. To turn back was unthinkable. To continue meant passing through areas where a single stray shot could ignite the fuel in his truck. His instincts screamed caution, yet something deeper, duty perhaps or stubborn resolve, propelled him onward. He whispered to himself, no turning back. As he navigated further, the obstacles multiplied. Fallen trees blocked narrow paths, forcing detours that threatened to trap the truck. Snow drifts concealed deep ruts that could immobilize him completely. Visibility was near zero, and the wind shredded any attempt to hear approaching footsteps or the distant rattle of artillery. Yet Jack moved methodically, relying on skill, memory, and instinct. Every inch gained felt like a victory, every skid avoided a reprieve. The forest itself became a test of endurance, patience, and courage. Hours stretched into a frozen eternity. Hunger, fatigue, and cold gnawed at him, but the thought of the men waiting for this fuel gave him purpose. The battalions at Bastogne were pinned, surrounded, desperate for fuel to move their tanks and vehicles. Without it, the German offensive would smash the lines and villages, already on the brink, would be annihilated. Jack's mind shifted between calculation and prayer, weighing each decision carefully. where to steer, when to accelerate, when to pause. He carried the invisible weight of countless lives, and the forest seemed to press against him as if aware of his responsibility. By late morning, Jack faced a moral dilemma that would define the legend of his journey. Ahead lay a narrow bridge, half collapsed under the weight of snow and ice. Intelligence had warned against crossing. It was too dangerous, too risky, too unapproved. Reports indicated that any heavy vehicle attempting the crossing would likely plunge into the freezing river below. The safe route, the one dictated by orders and maps, required doubling back, wasting hours the battalions could not afford. Jack hesitated. The weight of his cargo made the decision lethal. He could follow orders, turn back, and hope another convoy would reach the battalions in time. Or he could defy instructions, risk everything, and attempt the bridge. He considered the consequences: disciplinary action, court-martial, even death if the bridge failed. But he also thought of the men trapped behind enemy lines, the tanks immobilized by a lack of fuel, the villagers depending on a last-ditch defense. In that moment, courage replaced fear. He whispered almost to the truck itself, "We're crossing." The crossing was harrowing. The ice groaned beneath the tires, cracks appearing with every forward motion. Snow slid off the edges, revealing the dark, frigid water below. Jack's hands were numb, his body tensed, every nerve focused on the delicate balance between survival and disaster. The truck swayed dangerously, tires clawing for traction. And then, with a final judicious throttle, the rear wheels cleared the unstable span, and the truck rolled onto solid ground. Relief surged, but there was no time to savor it. The forest, the battle, and the clock waited for no man. Emerging from the final stretch of trees, Jack could see the first signs of Allied positions. Tanks lined up, their engines silent but ready. Soldiers trudging through snow, their eyes wide with exhaustion and anticipation. He approached the fuel depot, the truck rumbling beneath him like a heartbeat. Soldiers looked on, skeptical at first. Convoys were expected on approved routes, not on rogue detours, but their skepticism dissolved as Jack rolled barrels of fuel into position. The tanks sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life. Engines churned, treads gripped the snow, and suddenly the battalions trapped behind the German offensive had mobility restored. What Jack didn't know was how much of a ripple his actions had caused. His wrong turn, seemingly a minor mistake, had bypassed enemy patrols, avoided frozen ruts that would have trapped standard convoys, and reached the units that needed fuel most urgently. A tank commander who had been preparing for retreat now had the means to counterattack. Villages that had been on the brink of occupation were spared. Lines held, and the Germans' momentum faltered. In the quiet chaos of the Ardennes, Jack's decision, born of instinct, necessity, and sheer courage, had rewritten the immediate outcome of the battle. The soldiers cheered, but Jack remained quiet, almost invisible among them. No one knew the full story yet, not the higher command, not the historians later to write about Bastogne, not even the villagers whose homes had been spared. He felt only the exhaustion, the cold, and a strange sense of accomplishment. He had driven where no one else dared. He had taken a road unapproved, unknown, untested. And in doing so, he had altered the course of the battle. Throughout the day, Jack made additional runs, each more treacherous than the last. Snowstorms worsened, artillery shells fell at the edges of the forest, and German patrols became bolder, probing roads with machine guns and mortars. Every journey tested his resolve, yet every successful delivery of fuel reinforced the fragile lifeline keeping the battalions alive. Soldiers began to recognize him, a quiet hero among the chaos, though even they could not comprehend the full significance of his actions. By evening, Jack's truck had become more than a vehicle, it was a symbol. The wrong turn he had taken had become a lifeline, a thread connecting isolated men, immobilized tanks, and threatened villages. Each barrel of fuel was more than liquid energy, it was hope, survival, and a chance to fight another day. And yet, he never boasted, never explained, never paused to bask in glory. He simply drove, guided by instinct, duty, and the understanding that history sometimes required small, unrecognized acts to achieve monumental outcomes. Historians later pieced together the ripple effects of Jack's journey. The fuel he delivered allowed armored units to push back the German offensive, preventing a breakthrough that could have altered the Western Front. Villages like Foy and Neuville, which were moments away from falling into enemy hands, were defended successfully. The small acts of a single driver, navigating treacherous terrain and defying orders, had tangible consequences far beyond what anyone in the cab could have imagined. Jack Miller never considered himself a hero. He remembered the cold, the snow, the groaning tires on the ice, and the quiet moments of fear when he thought the journey might end in disaster. He remembered the glimmer of headlights on snow, the roar of tank engines finally alive, and the faint relief in the soldiers' faces. History would remember generals and strategies, but the battle itself had been won in part by a wrong turn, a single truck, and a man willing to drive into uncertainty for the sake of others. As night fell over the Ardennes, the forest settled once more, silent and cold. The snow muffled the battlefield, the wind whispered over frozen trees, and somewhere in the distance, the faint glimmer of victory began to take shape. Jack Miller's truck rested, engines idle but ready, its cargo spent but its impact eternal. In the quiet, the wrong turn he had taken seemed almost deliberate, as if fate itself had nudged him onto the path that would save lives and preserve hope. In the end, the Ardennes had not swallowed him. The forest had not defeated him. History had waited for his wheels to roll along the snow, carrying life where none had been expected. And though no parade, medal, or monument would fully capture the significance of that night, one truth remained. Sometimes the smallest decisions, made in solitude and under duress, shape the course of history more profoundly than the grandest plans of generals and kings. The legacy of Jack Miller. The Ardennes forest, long silent beneath layers of snow, had been a witness to history in motion. Weeks after the snow melted and the guns fell quiet, the small villages and battalions that had depended on a single truck driver's courage began to piece together what had occurred. They did not call him a hero. In the military hierarchy, Jack Miller was a mere driver, a cog in the machine. Yet without his wrong turn, without the daring decision to defy orders, entire regiments might have stalled, tanks might have frozen in place, and villages would have fallen to the German advance. The story was subtle, almost invisible, as if history itself had tried to obscure the deeds of those whose courage did not come with medals, parades, or public accolades. Jack returned from the Ardennes changed, though he barely recognized it at the time. The man who had gripped the wheel through hours of frostbite, isolation, and uncertainty now walked among soldiers and officers, the quiet of his presence belying the enormity of what he had accomplished. He did not boast, nor did he seek recognition. His satisfaction came from the knowledge that tanks were fueled, soldiers were moving, and the battle, chaotic, merciless, and uncertain, had been altered in a way no one could have predicted. In the months that followed, as the Allies pushed German forces back and eventually liberated occupied territories, Jack's contribution remained largely unknown, a thread woven into the vast tapestry of the Battle of the Bulge, subtle but essential. Yet those who had been there, the tank commanders and infantrymen, the medics and supply officers, remembered. They remembered the driver who appeared where he was not expected, bringing life-sustaining fuel across roads deemed impassable. They spoke quietly of the truck that came from nowhere, of a wrong turn that had saved them all. Jack's journey became legend in whispered conversations, in letters home, in post-war reunions. His bravery was never about glory, it was about survival, about the moral imperative to act when hesitation could cost lives. And in that quiet, uncelebrated courage, a deeper lesson of war emerged. Sometimes ordinary men must make extraordinary decisions, guided not by orders or maps, but by intuition, duty, and an unwavering sense of responsibility. In the years following the war, Jack Miller returned to a life that seemed mundane compared to the frozen forests of Belgium. He went back to driving trucks, this time delivering goods rather than fuel to embattled regiments. He married, raised a family, and rarely spoke of the Ardennes. To the world, he was just another man who had survived the chaos of war. To those who had been on the receiving end of his deliveries, he was a savior, a man whose instinct and resolve had held the line when the machinery of war threatened to fail. Even as history wrote volumes on generals, strategies, and battles, the quiet acts of a single truck driver remained largely unrecorded, though they were no less critical. Jack's story also serves as a meditation on the unpredictability of history itself. The grand strategies, the meticulously planned offensives, the directives from generals, they all mattered. But so did one man's wrong turn. So did the decision to press forward, alone, through snow, ice, and danger, with only instinct to guide him. Military historians later noted the logistical challenges of the Battle of the Bulge: frozen roads, disrupted supply lines, and overextended battalions. In their footnotes, buried among maps and statistics, lay the record of Jack Miller's contribution. Without the fuel he delivered, the Allied forces might have been immobilized at a critical juncture, giving the German offensive a chance to split the front and threaten entire regions of Belgium and Luxembourg. One wrong turn had, paradoxically, become the turning point of history. The moral weight of Jack's journey cannot be overstated. War is often defined by heroes with guns, by those who charge headfirst into enemy lines, by those who strategize and command. Yet in this story, heroism was defined by patience, judgment, and moral courage. The courage to make a decision when orders were ambiguous, when the risk was immediate and personal, and when hesitation could mean death for others. He demonstrated that courage is not always loud, it is not always celebrated, it is often quiet, invisible, and profoundly consequential. In Jack's case, bravery was measured not in bullets fired, but in barrels of fuel delivered, in lives spared, and in the subtle, imperceptible ways one man's decision reshaped a battle. The villagers in the Ardennes who were spared that December carried the memory of survival long after the war ended. Stories of men in tanks, soldiers in foxholes, and convoys of supply trucks became part of family lore. And somewhere in every whispered retelling was the acknowledgement that a lone driver had made all the difference. When children asked why some villages had survived while others had burned, parents often told them about the truck that appeared against all odds, about the courage of a man who trusted himself when the world told him to turn back. Jack's legacy, though quiet, lived on in every retelling, every memory, every life continued because he dared to act when compliance would have led to disaster. Jack's post-war reflections were rare and often internal. He sometimes woke in the night, remembering the frozen forest, the groaning tires, the icy bridges, the silent flares in the distance. He thought of the soldiers whose lives had depended on him and the unknown number of civilians saved by his wrong turn. And he understood, in ways words cannot capture, that the essence of war was not just the clash of armies but the individual choices that rippled outward, unseen but unstoppable. History's focus on grand strategy can obscure these acts, but Jack knew the truth. Battles are won not only by generals but by those who act when no one is watching. Decades later, military historians and documentary filmmakers would trace supply lines, study battalion movements, and calculate the critical moments of the Ardennes offensive. Maps, photographs, and archived reports revealed what Jack Miller had done. A solitary truck defied expectation and order, bypassing obstacles that could have delayed the delivery indefinitely. His wrong turn, initially feared as a mistake, had become the lifeline upon which entire operations depended. Analysts concluded that without his deliveries, the outcome of specific engagements could have shifted dramatically, delaying the relief of embattled units and costing countless lives. Yet in official histories, Jack's name appeared rarely, if at all. Recognition in this case was quiet and scattered, but no less profound. There is a lesson in Jack's story that transcends time and place. War is often romanticized as a theater of bold charges and heroic offensives, but its true fabric is woven from countless decisions made in isolation, in silence, in fear. Jack Miller exemplifies this reality. The man behind the wheel, facing the cold, the unknown, and the weight of human lives, making choices guided by conscience rather than command. His courage was not dictated by orders, medals, or recognition. It was defined by moral clarity and the willingness to act when hesitation could lead to catastrophe. Some men fight. Some men strategize. Some men command. And some men drive. They drive into uncertainty, into danger, into the frozen unknown. They carry the lifeblood of armies and the hope of civilians, threading their actions through the chaotic tapestry of war. Jack Miller was one such man. His wrong turn was not a mistake, it was a decision that altered the battlefield, reshaped the lives of those he could never meet, and underscored the hidden complexity of heroism. As the years passed, Jack rarely spoke of the Ardennes. His children knew only fragments: the snow, the cold, the trucks, and the men who had relied on him. He never sought fame, he never required accolades. Yet his story, like a quiet river beneath the roar of history, flowed steadily through time. Documentaries, historical analyses, and battlefield tours would eventually uncover his deeds, shedding light on the overlooked acts that quietly tipped the balance of the Battle of the Bulge. And when historians, journalists, or veterans' families pieced the puzzle together, they found a single extraordinary truth. A wrong turn had saved lives and a truck driver's courage had preserved hope in the darkest hour. In the final reckoning, Jack Miller's legacy is a testament to the unseen acts that shape history. He reminds us that heroism is often invisible, that courage may be expressed in solitude, and that the choices of a single individual can echo across time. In the Ardennes, in villages that still stand, in the memories of soldiers who survived, his decision remains alive, a beacon of moral clarity and human perseverance. The battle may be recorded in maps, casualty reports, and strategic assessments, but the lifeline that kept hope alive was born from one man's willingness to act against uncertainty, against orders, and against fear. Sometimes, the path that saves everything is the one you were never meant to take. Jack Miller had taken that path, alone in a truck, beneath the frozen trees of Belgium, delivering fuel that kept tanks moving, lives intact, and a battle from tipping into catastrophe. History often forgets the drivers, the carriers, the quiet individuals who make monumental impacts in moments of crisis. But Jack's story endures, a reminder that the course of history is not solely dictated by generals or maps, but also by those who have the courage to follow their instincts, to take a wrong turn that turns out to be exactly right. Even decades later, when snow blankets the Ardennes and the forest stands silent, veterans and locals alike remember. They speak in whispers of a truck that arrived when it should not have, of a driver whose courage bridged the gap between despair and survival. And in every telling, Jack Miller lives again, not as a man seeking glory, but as a symbol of the extraordinary potential of ordinary people when faced with impossible choices. The Battle of the Bulge, with all its strategy and sacrifice, may be studied in history books, but its true essence lies in the decisions made on frozen roads by people like Jack. It is in the small, almost invisible acts that ripple outward, unseen, yet inexorably altering the course of events. And for Jack Miller, the wrong turn he took that December night became a turning point not only in the battle, but in the lives of all who depended on him. History remembers battles. History remembers generals. History remembers strategies. But some men are remembered in quieter ways, through lives saved, through futures preserved, through the enduring impact of courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Jack Miller's legacy is such a story, a testament to the quiet heroism that courses through the veins of history, a reminder that sometimes the smallest, most unassuming acts carry the greatest weight. The Ardennes, cold and silent, whispers his name in the rustle of trees and the crunch of snow. And though no plaque, no medal, no parade will ever fully capture the magnitude of what he achieved, the truth remains. One truck, one driver, one wrong turn, and a world changed forever.